All right, I'm Dave Ratt, and today let's talk about soldering irons. There's a lot of different soldering irons available out there, and they each have unique assets and detriments. Some of them only have detriments. And I'm going to show you the favorite soldering iron that I have, and the couples that I use the most. And then we'll do a test and see which one lights up the fastest, which one we get running sooner. Okay, so let's start with the basics. First of all, I'll talk about the worst soldering irons out there, which are the solder guns that kind of go, they're heavy, they've got a little transformer in them, the wire comes out, they kind of come back, and they're just pretty much big, heavy, awkward, difficult to use, and every time you push the button, you gotta wait for them to heat up. Pretty much the least desirable of irons out there. Second in the ease or commonness is the all-in-one power cord attached to soldering iron. This one I've had for a really long time. I think it's called the Little Dandy. It works all right. I don't use this anymore. I dug it out of a drawer. They take a while to heat up. Having the full AC power cord on the back side of it is kind of annoying, but in your toolbox, this seems like it could be a good choice, but there's something better. For traveling around and soldering on the road, getting a gas-powered butane iron. This is a Weller Pro Pen WSTA6. It's been great. This thing's awesome. You just basically push this button here, click, it fires up, and little flame goes in there. It heats up quick. It's super handy. There's no cable to it. I actually really like working with it because there is no cable, and it heats up quick. You do got to be careful setting it down. There's a little vent here where the hot gases escape, and if you set it down with the vent pointing down, it will burn or melt or mess with whatever surface if you don't use a holder like I usually don't. Yeah, not much disadvantage to this. They don't work great in wind, but no real iron. It's difficult for irons to work in wind. That cold air blowing across them will cool them down. Also, the tips, there's not a lot of tips. You can get a bunch of tips, but they're not easy to change. But these things are great. Highly recommend for the portable kit. It's just awesome. And you don't need power to run it. Let's look at the other two. So now these are common. This one is a Haku. But there's a bunch of them. They've got basically a box, a volume control or temperature control that you can turn up and down and adjust the temperature, as well as a little stand. And these are pretty common in their various incarnations, and the cord tends to be somewhat more flexible, or quite a bit more flexible than running the power cord to it. And these can get quite good. There's a wide variety of them out there. And then to change the tips on this, you would unscrew the end, and there's various tip changing. You slide a new one on, put a different one on there, and just slide it back over. And making sure this is tight and has a good contact. If the tip feels loose or is rattling around, the thermal contact can be compromised and it will slow things down a bit. And then we have my personal favorite, which is, this is actually an older model of a Metcal. There's newer ones, I've looked them up. I have not used the newer ones. There's an older model of Metcal. I don't know what model it is. Let's take a look. Might be able to find these things used. It is a LR90648, it seems to be, this power supply. Serial number 6E something or other. I don't know the model. Great unit. And the reason these are cool is it's actually a inductive iron. The tips just slide right out. You don't have to unscrew anything. So If your iron's hot, you have a bad tip, or you need to switch to a different tip, you just grab this with the pliers, pull it out, set it down on something safe, and then slide a new tip in and turn it back on, and it'll fire right up. Also, it must have a really high voltage. This cable is extremely flexible. I mean, it is rubbery. You see it lays very flat. This one here does not lay flat. And it's just a pleasure to use. And let's go ahead and look at tips, and then we will take a look at firing these things up. So using the right tip. Now this, I'm mainly doing this video on soldering irons to cover making XLR cables, and we'll go over the different tips that are out there and what I like to use. This one here is approximately 1/4 of an inch, or maybe 6 millimeters. And it's basically a screwdriver tip. There's a wide variety of tips out there, just every possible shape and hook shaped and flats. And this is pretty big for an XLR. Since the cups on the XLR connector are only about 1/8 of an inch, having something that's 2 to 3 times the opening there, which is smaller than 1/8 of an inch, is just a bit awkward. Yes, you can do it, but it's a little much. Going to the other end of the spectrum, here is a little tiny needle tip. For the Hako, and here's a needle tip that's fairly old. You can see it's kind of blooming out on the sides there for the Metcal. These tiny little tips, and they can be great for getting into super small places. Here's a couple more. I think I put one on here. Oh, there's a middle-sized tip. This one's probably 3/16 of an inch, and then here's probably an 1/8 of an inch or a little bit less. I like to have them about this dimension here, and I've got one on, or this dimension here. It's about 1/8 of an inch, plus or minus. It's enough. If you don't have enough tip on there, when you heat something up, the cold metal cools down the tip, and you kind of lose heat, and you got to wait for a period of time, a second or two or more, for the tip to recuperate and catch up to it. If you have more tip and more mass there, it'll transfer more heat quickly, and it can kind of keep up with what you're working on. If you don't have enough tip, that can really force you to put heat to the unit or to the wires for a longer period of time, which is undesirable. Then your connector gets hot, the wire's insulation can melt, and it can make things awkward for you. All right, so I'm going to put this one in here, and I'm going to put a similar sized tip here in the other iron, about here. And what we'll do is, let's see which one lights up quicker. We can also talk about solder in a minute. Oh, before we do that, let's talk about temperature. So soldering temp, if the temp is too low, you're going to have to, if it's below the solder melt point, it's not going to work. If it's right at the solder melt point, the heat is going to spread quite a distance before you get that solder up to temperature, and it's going to flow smoothly. And you really want to have all of the pieces that you're connecting brought up to full temp, the solder to flow, and the flux to flow and bond everything. If you have a low temp, you might get solder balled up and expand the heat to where you don't want it to go. Overly hot can destroy components if you're working on delicate stuff. But if it's very hot, you can get in and out quick. You can go solder and remove it by using something that's a moderate heat. It's going to get you a middle amount of time. So you want to adjust your heat as high as you can get to work with your work time is generally how I go. So I know how long I can get in, I can kind of put the solder in, heat it up, and then get out. So if it's already smoking and the wires are melting back in that amount of time, my iron's too hot. If I'm holding it there for an excessive period of time, or wait 1, 2, 3, 4, then my iron's too cold. The temperature I like to use, this is a 775 degree on the Metcal, and I like that between 750 and 800 degrees, or 850 is the way to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank this one all the way up to 900 degrees. And then I am going to take 2 pieces of solder here. And I'm going to lay both of these irons out on the table. Get this out of the way. And I will turn them both on simultaneously and we'll see which one heats up quicker. One of the things that I like about this Met Cow is how quickly it does heat up. Okay, so ready and go. And we got melt on the Met Cow. We're already ready to go. So let's go ahead and keep this guy going here. And we're still waiting here. Oh, and we've got melt on the Hako, I'll call it a Hako. All right, as you can see, it's not that much time to wait, but having this thing come up instantly, boom, fire it up and you're ready to solder is quite handy. And also it cools down quite quickly too. It's not gonna be cold now, but these tips are fairly hollow and they don't have a lot of mass to them. And they heat up very quickly, cool down fairly quickly, and it transfers heat well. Let's talk about cleaning the iron. Okay, so having the iron live, and when you're done soldering, it's a great idea to throw an extra bit of solder on there, which has got flux in it. You want to use flux core solder, and you throw some extra on there. I clean the iron. I keep the iron clear by tapping. I use a bucket of some sort, or if I'm out in the field, I might just throw it into a trash can or whatever. And when you turn off the iron, it's a good idea to throw a little solder on there before you shut it off. It'll keep the tip protected. One of the things that hurts the tips is just sitting there baking. If you leave an iron on for an extended period of time, the end will corrode. It'll oxidize and make the solder not want to stick. And you'll have to clean it. So let's talk about cleaning it. There's common ways are sponge. Now if you use the sponge, when you pull off the sponge, then the solder sits there and balls up in the sponge. It's a good way of wiping it clean, but I rarely use a sponge. I don't want to go get water and deal with that. So what I'll do is I'll just put solder on and flick it into the bucket. And that does a great job. When the iron does build up some corrosion at the end, having some sort of steel wool or copper wool, whatever this wool is, this metal wool, can kind of abrade the end and scrape it clean. And it does a really good job, so I do like that. I mean, that's really pretty right now. And then cleaning your iron before you shut it down. That's working great. All right, we talk about solder. You know, it used to be almost all solder was lead solder. Never use acid core solder for doing electronics. Acid core is for like soldering a hole in a radiator of a car, and it will eat up the acid cleaner. The acid flux will eat through traces on circuit boards and corrode things. It's only deals with really aggressive type cleaning on heavier duty stuff. You want a rosin core solder. If you're having trouble with your solder, not your irons corroding up, get a different solder. It's got more rosin to it. Lead solder was really common. I mean, everything was lead for many years. Now, aluminum-based solder is the way to go. You know, it's compatible, it's safer, it doesn't have the poisonous lead that gets into our environment. Though the lead solder does tend to work a little better, it tends to be a little easier to work with, and you know, using it in small amounts obviously is not going to be the end of the world. I will use aluminum solder on everything that goes to sound tools, or if it's going out into the general public. And for general maintenance and stuff, I've had this probably for 3 or 4 years. I just use lead solder because it's easier to work with, and yeah, it makes a cleaner joint, typically. Cool. So as I'm shooting this video, I get everything all done, and then someone had mentioned on the XLR videos that I did in one of the posts, and a couple other people sent me messages to check out the TS100, which is an electronic soldering iron. And it's kind of weird because it's like you can't really figure out who makes this thing. There's a whole bunch of different companies that brand it. They all say TS100 and TS80. TS80 is the USB powered one. TS100 is the one that powers off of any 12 to 24 volt power supply. You can use the same one as your laptop or whatever other gear you've got. They seem to just like be maybe a generic item that a bunch of different companies sell, made in China. In any case, I was skeptical, so I bought one. So let's go ahead and take a look. And I've opened it up already, but this is the little guy. Has a little power unit here. And the one I got just came with a tip. I just wanted to, and you can change the tips out and buy packs of multiple tips. It came with a little Allen wrench that does not fit very well into the screw to tighten it up. So I've got a different tool here that does fit to tighten it up. When I put this in, this one's got a little angled head on it. I like to have the head this way. And I have not soldered with this yet. I fired it up, but I have not used it yet. So let's do a couple things. I'm gonna grab some solder here. And the first thing I wanna do is let's see how long it takes for this thing to heat up. So we'll plug it in and you should be able to see on your video time. I'm gonna count in my head here. So ready, and we'll plug it in. And I don't know if it turns on automatically. One. Oh, it says press. So let's go ahead and start it. There we go. One, two. All right, that's about 6 or 8 seconds. That's really fast. That's beautiful. That's really quick. And that's with the 24 volt supply. You know, the wire's kind of clunky on this. I wouldn't be optimal, and the soldering iron doesn't weigh a lot, so it's definitely gonna be a little awkward there. But okay, with a little soldering station. Portability wise, if you have the power supply to for something else. Now it says 300 degrees, and I can change the temperature here. I think. There we go. 280, 270, 260. I can go up. I'm gonna go up to 400. And it's got some auto off and auto on and some programming. Let's go ahead and solder a cable and see how that does. For portability, it's awesome, especially if you can use a power supply from something else that you already carry with you. And I've already prepped this cable end, so I'm just going to see how this works. And I can tell it's not quite as hot as the Metcal 400, but it's still plenty hot to get the job done, especially in the field where you don't want to carry anything like that Metcal, and it doesn't have the gas power, you know, the butane and the fumes and stuff. So yeah, you can definitely tell that it doesn't have a tremendous amount of heat there. It's definitely running at a lower temperature. I can tell by how long it's taking to flow, but definitely usable and portable. Let's go ahead, and I have blue to 2 here. Let's do this. Let's see how it solders into that. Okay, works all right. Get the ground in here. See how it handles the thicker side of things. Yeah, it's taking some time here. All right, so compared to the gas-powered iron, definitely doesn't have as much heat as the butane-powered or the Metcal. All right, it works okay. Portability and size-wise, this thing's amazing. I mean, this doesn't weigh anything, super small, and very handy. I think for me, I could throw this into a case, you know. and have a backup. Not having to get butane to fill it up is nice because butane's kind of a pain. I think I still would take the butane iron. So I'll put this as number 4, 3 or 4. Metcal being favorite. Butane portable being my second favorite. And this guy would be probably number 3 for portability. Cool, I think that does it. Fun stuff, and I will continue this series on soldering XLR cables. Awesome. So thank you for hanging out, and I hope you found this video and others that I do interesting and informative. And check out soundtools.com. Take a look at the products that I personally designed, some solutions for the pro audio industry, analog over Cat5, a bunch of testers, and other useful tools. Ratsound.com has got our sales department, rental department, install department. We sell a wide variety of pro audio and AV gear. We do installations, small to large, and we do rentals for everything as small as local clubs and backyard parties all the way up to Coachella Festival and artists like Pearl Jam, Jack Johnson, Blink-182. And thanks for hanging out.